Hello and welcome to FusionQA, episode number 5 of using Selenium with Ruby. In this episode, we will cover how to locate elements. And this is part 2 of a previous discussion that we had in episode 4. And this is one of the most important techniques that you will learn when using Selenium-Webdriver, that how to locate elements on a web page. And as we said last time, Selenium-Webdriver offers a number of different ways to find and locate elements, around 8 or so different ways. Last time in episode 4, we covered how to find elements 3 different ways. And there are more of the common ways. Number 1, we covered how to find an element via an ID. Number 2, we covered how to find an element via a class. And number 3, we also went over how to find an element via a name. In this episode, we will cover how to locate or find an element via link text, partial link text, tag name, CSS selectors, and last but not least, XPath. So let's get started. First, we're going to pull up or launch our IRB session where we can, play around with Selenium-Webdriver and Ruby. So I have here, I've required my Selenium-Webdriver, and I made an instance of the Selenium-Webdriver for Chrome, and I set that into a variable called driver. So all the commands we will do it via this driver variable. So first off, we will navigate to our demo website where we will do some of these demonstrations. All right, so this is our demo web page here. Just a simple login page, as you can see. So the first thing we will demonstrate here is how to find an element via link text. And using link text, this method only works when you are locating link elements which are links on the page. So for example, on this page, we can locate this element right here at the bottom in the footer where it says powered by Elemental Selenium. This highlighted blue thing, link here, this is a link text because it's a text and it's a link, right? You can tell when you hover over it down here, it shows Elemental Selenium down there on the bottom of the browser. So we're going to locate this via Selenium and Ruby. So what we're going to do here in the terminal is we're going to make a variable called link text underscore element, and that's going to be equal to our driver that we started in the beginning. And then we're going to do a find element on there, and then we're going to call a link, and the link's name is Elemental Selenium, right? So the link name will just be whatever we want to click on. In this case, it's Elemental Selenium. You can right click on this and do an inspect. We forgot to do that, but if you just do an inspect on this, you'll see, the HTML here and CSS and HTML. So here we see Elemental Selenium is the link text, and that's what we want to locate this element by. And then we're just going to close that up, and there you go. So we see here that that link has now been stored. It's been found and it's been stored in this link text element. So for example, just to demonstrate further, if we want to do a link text on element.click to make sure that it's actually the correct element, it's been found. So if we do a link text element.click, it will click that Elemental Selenium link. Here we go. See, there you go. So it basically clicked that link for us. So let's just close that browser or that tab, the new tab that opened up there. Now, the second thing we are going to demonstrate is how to find or locate an element using partial link text. And as the name suggests here, it's exactly like link text as in the previous example, but the main difference here is that you only need to add part of the link text, right? Whereas in the first example, we had to include the entire link text, which was Elemental Selenium. So in this case, we'll do something like this. So all right, so here what we have is we just did our driver.find element, and then we did partial link text, right? We're not, that's the main difference there. And then we only did part of the link text. So in this case, we did elemental. And if we just do enter there, it stored it for us. It found it and it stored it for us. And again, what we're going to do here is, but you know what? We forgot to store it there. So what we can do, we can actually store it this way. Partial. This is a little trick you can do. Partial equal underscore. It'll store the last, the last command that you gave it. So this should store it for us. So that just stored it for us in the variable partial. A little neat trick you can pick up there and use. So if we do partial.click, this should click the elemental Selenium link for us again, and just notice the browser change. There you go. And let's close that tab again. All right. So the next way to locate an element is via tag name, right? Via tag name. So this basically will locate elements whose tag name matches the search value that we provide. And in most cases, tag name isn't the ideal way to locate elements because the reason being there are multiple elements of the same tag present on the page in a lot of cases. And the most common use case or scenario that you're going to be using locating by tag names is when you have a collection of items, a collection of elements, such as a list or checkboxes and things of that sort. So in our example here, what we're going to do is we're going to locate this button via the tag name. So if I do an inspect on this button here, so we have here, this is the button, and the tag name is basically we're going to locate it via this tag name of I. The tag name is I, right? So what we will do here is something like this. All right, so what we've done here is we made a variable called tag underscore element, and we called our driver, and we're in driver.find element, and we just specified that we want to use this tag name to locate the element, and the tag name, as we saw via our inspector, was I, right? So we put I there in quotes, and then this whole thing will be stored in a variable called tag element. And let's just hit enter there, and there you go. It found it there. And again, just to show it actually did work, we're going to do tag underscore element dot click. We're going to click that button to make sure it's actually what it's telling us. So this should click this login button, and we should get some sort of message here or some sort of error because we haven't filled this form out properly. There you go. So we clicked that tag element and it gave us an error. Your username is invalid because we don't have any the form filled out. The next method of locating element we will demonstrate is via a CSS selector. This can be like, you can find it via a text field, via a checkbox, and different sorts of CSS selectors. And this basically locates elements when by whatever matching CSS selector you give it, right? So in this using the CSS selector method is similar to using XPath, which is what we'll show in the next example. And there are discussions about which is faster, and some think that this way is faster, but that's a different discussion. Anyway, in our example, what we're going to do is we are going to locate this username text field right here, this username text field via the CSS selector. So if I do an inspect on this username text field, so we know via this that this is an input, right? It's an input CSS selector, right? That's what we want to use here, this input. And the input type is text. Input type is text. So that's what we're going to use for our CSS selector to locate it. And we'll do something like this. All right, so now what I have here is I just made a variable called CSS, and we call our driver, and again, the method.find element, and we are now using the CSS, right? We're going to find it by CSS. And as we said before, we want to use the input type equals text. As we saw here, input type equals text. So you just have to use a syntax like this, right? And now this should, and then, for other CSS selectors like checkboxes or buttons, etc., you can look at the the Selenium-Webdriver Ruby bindings API to figure out exactly what syntax you need to use accordingly. So if I hit enter here, this should store it for us. And now, as you see, it stored that username for us there, right? So let's just click out of there. So now you see, notice, we're not in that username text field right now. So now I'm just going to do a css.click, and it should select that text box for us when I execute this command. So take note of that. And there you go. So it selected it for us, and that worked as well. Now, the last method of locating an element we will cover is XPath. And XPath stands for XML path language. It's basically a query language for selecting nodes from the document, right? And basically what it does is it locates elements matching an XPath expression that we're going to give it. And this XPath works, I would say, probably just as good as using CSS selectors. But the syntax for XPath, it can get quite complicated. And XPath selectors, they can be, there's a lot of flexibility when you do use them, but they can also be a little bit slow as well. But in my experience, that you really probably can't avoid having to use XPath for at least some elements. That when you're going to be writing some test scripts, there will be some elements that you're going to have to use XPath as a last resort, because none of the other selectors will work. So this is a nice, technique that you should learn and have a good understanding of how to use it. So what we're going to do is we are going to use XPath to click on the Elemental Selenium link in the footer. Okay, so we're going to do something like this. All right, so what we did here was, again, we made an XPath underscore element variable, called our driver, the method.findElement, and then we said, okay, we want to use XPath this time. Again, with it inside the parentheses, XPath. And then what we do is within the quotes, we do dash backslash, and then we call the A tag, right? And I forgot to do an inspect on this. Sorry about that. If you do inspect on the Elemental Selenium, you'll see here that there's an A tag there. So we're going to use an A tag. And then, you open your brackets, and then you have this href link, okay? And that is equal to this URL, http://elementalselenium.com, and that's what we put in there, after the href attribute. And then we close that up, just like as we have here in the example. And so we see it stored it for us in that XPath element. And again, just to demonstrate here, XPath element dot click, it should click that footer link for us and take us to the Elemental Selenium webpage. There you go. So it opens up another tab for us and takes us to that Elemental Selenium webpage. So we know that it is working. Now, that's the last few methods of how to locate an element. There are around, as we said, around 8 or so different methods that we can use. And again, the recommendation is to keep your locators as compact and readable as possible. When you ask Selenium-Webdriver to go through the DOM, the document object model, the structure of that, if it has to traverse it via some complicated queries and really long expressions, it's a really expensive and costly operation. The more you have to give it, so the more we can narrow down the scope of our search, meaning the more short our queries are, and the more easier it is to find, the better it is, and the more quicker and more efficient it is for the WebDriver to find the given elements that we're looking for. So that wraps up this episode. I hope it was of benefit, and if you have any questions or suggestions, please leave a comment below or email me at farooq@fusionqa.net. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe, connect with us on social media, and these show notes and other details are in the description. Thanks for watching.